Archaic Records.
Hey, what's up, everybody? It is Archaic Records here with you again. My name is Jamie, coming at you from Nashville, Tennessee. And today we're going to go back to 1982 as we talk a little bit about the fifth album, Oh No, It's Devo, by American Spud Boys. You guessed it, Devo. Now, Devo formed in Akron, Ohio in 1973. The band began releasing their self-produced singles in 1974. And in 1978, the band released their major label debut, Are We Not Men? Now, my personal relationship with this band goes back probably to the early 80s. The early days of MTV, at least in my house. Looking back on it, as a little kid, I was always planted right there in front of the TV, especially when my parents weren't home, and I was usually glued to the MTV. I'm sure it was through that medium that I first discovered this band, through some of their very iconic music videos back in the early days of MTV, pretty much really all through the early to mid-1980s now. My Devo fandom really, I think, could have its origins traced back to this relatively obscure little piece of music history. Now you may be asking yourself, what in the hell does this have to do with Devo? Now this is a compilation cassette album that was released in 1983 on GSA International Records, called Summer Fun, Volume 2, just in case you go out ever looking for it. But what is significant about this little compilation cassette was that when I was a little kid, my mom had about 3 or 4 cassettes in her car that she would listen to just over and over and over again. Now, I think I've mentioned this on this channel in the past. Both of my parents were really big music fans at the time. Both my parents had relatively good taste in music. Looking back on it, I guess I should consider myself fortunate that my parents did have relatively good taste in music. But as a kid, it wasn't music that I really had any appreciation for. They liked, as I like to call it at the time, old people music. But this tape, which my mom had in her car, featured contemporary songs that were being heard on MTV and on the radio. Now, I don't understand or know why or how my mom owned this cassette. My parents were not into contemporary music, especially in the 80s. They were not into any of the MTV music. I can't imagine my parents sitting around and listening to A Flock of Seagulls, or Devo, or Billy Idol, or any of those artists, but yet all of those artists appeared on this cassette tape, which I don't know how or where my mom got. Now, this is not the original one that my mom had. This is something that I found on eBay as sort of a nostalgic museum piece several years ago. But I do remember that my mom listened to this tape pretty relentlessly in her car. And compared to the other 2 or 3 cassettes she had in her car, I loved this. A lot of the songs on this little compilation are songs I still love. And some of these songs, when I still hear, I still think of this cassette. Now, if you go through the track listing on this little cassette compilation, like I said, this was not music that my mom listened to at all. I'm sure she doesn't remember where she got it now, but I'd love to know what inspired her to buy this particular album. But on side 1, it has the song Mickey by Tony Basil, Hot in the City by Billy Idol, Whirly Girl by OXO, I Ran by Flock of Seagulls, and Celebration by Kool and the Gang. None of those songs or artists I would ever associate with my mother in any capacity. On side 2, there was Jesse's Girl by Rick Springfield, 65 Love Affair by Paul Davis, Someday Someway by Marshall Crenshaw, Whip It by Devo, and Abracadabra by the Steve Miller Band. Like I said, I remember driving around in my mom's car. She would blast that tape all the time. It was very refreshing to me as a wee lad compared to the other music that both of my parents listened to. At the time, I didn't think, I had no appreciation for their taste in music. Looking back on it now, I think that both my parents had relatively good taste in music. But as far as my actual real Devo fandom goes, I think I would trace that back to probably around 1994, not long after I got out of high school. Now, right after I moved out of high school, I moved out of my parents' house and into my own apartment for the first time, and had my own money really for the first time in my life. And I basically went on just this insane music shopping spree. That was really the first time in my life I ever really went on this just crazy, insane music shopping spree. But one day I woke up, and as I was sort of starting to get into music kind of like this is again when I started getting into kind of like punk rock. I had recently discovered the Smiths. I was going back and rediscovering at least a lot of the music from the 80s, Adamant, Billy Idol, Flock of Seagulls, and of course Devo. But I remember one day I woke up specifically and I thought to myself, man, I'm going to go downtown and I'm going to buy a Devo CD. Now at the time, I was living in Chico, California. I was going to school out there. Actually, I hadn't even started school by this point in time, but I was going to school in Chico, California. And at the time, we had 4 little thriving record stores in our little downtown area. My favorite of which was easily a place called The Underground. It was sort of this rock and roll department store. It had CDs, cassettes. It had a head shop in the back. They had tons of t-shirts, stickers, bootlegs. They sold those giant sort of European concert posters. And that was basically my go-to store before I'd go to any of the other 4 record stores in Chico. Was I would always have to stop at the Underground first because that was where my loyalty lied, if you will. And at the time when I went in to buy my first ever sort of Devo album, there was a girl who worked at the Underground in Chico that I was sort of secretly obsessed with. Now, this was the early 1990s. She was what we would call back in those days an alternative girl. She was very cool, very aesthetically pleasing, if you will. And she had just that right amount of snotty record store clerk attitude, which to me made her completely desirable. And I was just really intimidated, but also sort of secretly in love with her. And I used to go in there all the time to buy CDs. I wasn't just being a cretin. But every time she would go in there, I would sort of like hide behind a rack of CDs and sort of pretend like I was flipping through the CDs and then like side eye over there. Or I remember there was a rack of posters that were right near where the cashier stood, and I used to go over there and flip through the posters, and I would see her standing over there, and I would be pretending like I was looking at the posters, but out of my side eye over here, I'd just become like, oh man, look at that right there. But anyway, as the day came when I decided I was going to buy my first Devo album on CD, I went into the Underground, and on that particular day, I was on a mission to find a Devo CD. On that particular day in the store, they only had 1 copy each of 2 Devo albums, one being the album Freedom of Choice, and the other one being Oh No, It's Devo. And I consciously made the decision that I was going to buy the Oh No, It's Devo album because the record store girl, as I used to call her, was working there. I was very intimidated by her coolness. I was very sort of insecure in my own nerdiness at the time. So I purposely and consciously decided that I was going to buy Oh No, It's Devo over Freedom of Choice because I did not want her to think that I was only buying Freedom of Choice for the song Whip It. Now, I don't know what it was I don't know if this is still a thing with kids nowadays, younger people nowadays, but back in those days, at least for me, being seen as or accused of being a poser was sort of one of my biggest fears. Sometimes I felt like I would rather be caught in two rival gangs' crossfire than be accused of being a poser. I know it's completely irrational, but as I was in the CD store that day, contemplating which one of these CDs to buy, I was terrified that if I bought the Freedom of Choice album, that she would think I was only buying it for the song Whip It, and therefore would label me as being a poser, which is something that I just could not live with at the time. Now, at the time, I probably was a poser. I was in the age where you just learn a lot about music, but for some reason I had this just phobia of being labeled as a poser. So anyway, I did buy Oh No, It's Devo. That's why I chose to do this album on this episode instead of starting at the beginning of their catalog. I thought I would start with this one because this was the first Devo album I ever owned. I took it home, listened to it, and basically immediately my fandom was born. I went back and bought all of the records that had come out before this, including Freedom of Choice. I finally got over my little phobia of being labeled a poser. And over the next few years, I would say that I became a reasonably big Devo fan. It wasn't until 1996 that I actually got to see the band live. I think I saw them the first time at Lollapalooza when it hit the Bay Area in 1996. And I was just really excited to see this band live. It was around this time that I felt like I was finally really starting to become familiar with the catalog, even though I'd been listening to it maybe for a couple of years. I thought I was ready to see the band. I was really excited to see them. And I remember at that same Lollapalooza, the Ramones played, which I was also incredibly excited about. And I think I've told you that the Ramones played, I think they played right after Devo, if I'm not mistaken. The Ramones were not very good, but Devo completely blew me away. That was the first time I ever saw them. And I've seen Devo several times over the years. They are one of the most consistently great live bands I have ever seen. That show in 1996 was probably my favorite show of theirs I've ever seen, just because it was the first time I was so excited to see them. Like I said, I've seen them many times over the years. Another show that to me really stood out was in 2010. I got to see the band on the Something for Everybody tour, which I really loved. Now, I'd seen the band a few times before that, but I really loved seeing the Something for Everybody tour because that was the first time the band had put out a new album. And man, I think it was 20 years at that point in time. The band seemed excited. The fans seemed excited. It was cool to see a new aesthetic. It was cool to hear some new songs live. Before that, all the times I'd seen Devo, and I don't say this as a criticism. I'm not trying to be critical, but of all the times I saw Devo before that, their set list was fairly predictable. They do kind of like the greatest hits sort of set list thing. So in 2010, when they incorporated some new songs off of the new album, Something for Everybody, I thought it was really cool. I thought it was cool to see a new aesthetic now, as we've all lived with that album. Something for Everybody I can't believe that album's been out 13 years. To me, the album isn't really all that great to me. At the time, I really liked it a lot. It's just kind of like landed in my record collection. I don't listen to it very often. But like I said, seeing that tour live was a great. And then, of course, in 2014, probably my second favorite Devo show ever was the Hardcore Anniversary show at the Fox Theater in Oakland, California. That show blew me away. I did a video on this channel, if you want to scroll down, earlier talking about that show, talking about the live album, Hardcore Live. That was not only was it probably my second favorite time seeing Devo live, period, but it was probably one of the top 5 non-Morrissey shows I've ever been to. That show was just absolutely incredible. Now, for me, over the years, my relationship with Devo has sort of been kind of interesting. At least I think it's interesting. In that my fandom sort of tends to come and go in waves. Now, I'm always a Devo fan. I'm not saying, I would never say that I'm not. But for me, my Devo fandom kind of like comes in, and I become like really into him for a while. I get almost like obsessive with him. And then after a year or two, it kind of pulls back, and I kind of give it a break. This is a band I tend to, when I get into my sort of obsessive phases with this band, I tend to listen to them all the time. I just go back, I re-listen to everything, I overanalyze it, I analyze everything, I get really into it. And I think I sort of have a tendency to burn myself out on it, honestly. So I kind of pull back to where, I love them. I listen to them periodically. But in 2014, I think it was before that. I think 2012, I was going through one of my real Devo phases where I was really into the band, really going through like an obsessive phase with the band. I began an Instagram fan page for the band called Spud Army, which I did for probably about 2 years. It was that sort of thing where I was really into the band again for a couple of years, and I kind of burnt myself out on it. But it was fun doing that sort of Instagram fan page for the band. Now it's still out there somewhere. I haven't posted to it or logged into it in many years. It's still sitting out there somewhere collecting dust. But one thing that was fun about it was it sort of connected you with other people who were fans of the band. I felt like that little Instagram page sort of developed a community of people around it. People seemed to enjoy it. Now, I'm typically not very good at this whole social media thing. I'm sure that shocks the hell out of you. But it was something that was a lot of fun at the time. Like I said, I think it was one of those things where I was just really into the band for a while. I got a Devo tattoo, which I don't know if you can see right there. Spud Boy. That's how I get with this band. I get really obsessive with this band, and then it kind of pulls back a little bit. But the Devo fan page, Spud Army, was a lot of fun because of the people that found it. People seem to have a good time with it. That's something I've always kind of wished we had more of in the Morrissey fan base, is more of a community. I've said this before, but Morrissey fans tend to be sort of miserable loners, maybe sort of not community-driven individuals. No judgment, I'm one of you. But anyway, let's get into this album just a little bit before I waste even more of your time. This album is Devo's fifth album. It was released on October 27th, 1982, produced by Roy Thomas Baker. Now, for me, this is a sentimental favorite because it was the first album of the bands I ever owned. Having said that, I don't think I would say that this is their best album, because it's not their best album, quite frankly. But to me, this is an album that I've always had a real soft spot for. Really, all of the first 5 albums in the band's catalog, I think, are pretty classic. Even going back to the band's hardcore era, I mean, a lot of that stuff is some of the greatest music ever made. Now, some of the hardcore era stuff kind of like is a bit much for me sometimes, but I really love this record a lot. The album title was, as Mark Mothersbaugh said, pretty self-explanatory, really. The album title came from what Mark assumed was people's reaction to the idea of a new Devo album coming out. I'm sure you probably have that same reaction whenever you see that I've posted another one of these videos. You're like, oh no, it's that Archaic Records guy. When's he going to learn that nobody likes him? As far as the sound of the album, bassist Jerry Casale sort of described the sound of this album being inspired by things that they had heard from critics in the past. Certain critics had described Devo as being fascists, while others had referred to the band as a bunch of clowns. So Jerry Casale said the band decided to make an album that would sound as if it were made by fascist clowns. Now, generally speaking, when this record came out, I think it got pretty good critical notice. To me, Devo is one of those bands that really sort of represent a line of demarcation when it came to music critics. Music critics at the time who were younger, a little bit more hip, a little bit more in the know, they tended to love this band. Whereas music critics who perhaps came from maybe an older school, pre sort of the MTV era of music, they did not know what to make with this band. They had no idea what to do with it. Now, I really love this album a lot. Like I said, this is a sentimental favorite for me. It's not necessarily my favorite album in the catalog, but I really do love this album. I like a lot of the songs on it. Now, for me, if I had to throw a little bit of shade its way, the only real severe criticism that I would give this record is, to me, it sounds a little bit monotonous, or monotone. I shouldn't say monotonous. It sounds a little bit monotone. A lot of the songs on this record just kind of bleed together. I have heard people criticize the drumming on this record, the drum sound on this record, and I will say that I really disagree with that. I really love the drum sound on this record. I love the drumming on this record. Of course, the band was starting to experiment more with electronic and synthesized drum effects on this record. But I think that the drum sound on this album is still relatively organic sounding. Now, it wasn't until the band's next album, Shout, in 1984, where they really castrated Alan Myers and really went too electronic with the drum sound, which I never understood, because I thought it gave that record a real neutered sound. And of course, Alan Myers, in my opinion, is in the top two drummers in the history of punk rock. Between him and Rick Buckler from The Jam, I think that those are the two best drummers in the history of this style of music. And on the album Shout, the electronic drumming and the drum sampling and the drum programming killed that record. I don't really like Shout much at all. But I really love, of course, the Devo artwork is always top of the line. The band is, of course, as much visual presentation as they are music. They are as much packaging as they are the product. Now, that's not to say that this band is visually based. I don't think. I think that this band's music holds up over time, but I really love this album cover. This might actually be my favorite of the Devo album covers. I did like the aesthetic for this record. It was a little bit different. I mean, that was one of the things about the exciting things probably about being a Devo fan at the time, was not only hearing the new songs and the new music, but it was the new aesthetic, it was the new uniforms, it was the new videos. And that was another thing I would say about how this record to me is a little bit monotone is, the videos that the band produced for this record are all very similar to each other. You almost get the feeling that they were almost like all filmed in like one day almost. But if you open this up, the packaging, of course, you've got the iconic album cover. Now, on the back of this one, I don't know if you can see the perforation. It has not been popped out on my copy, but it had the frame back on it, so you could pop part of this out and set it on your desk as a lovely frame. One of the cool things in particular about this particular album was it came with the Devo, the Club Devo order form, the merchandise order form on the inside sleeve. So you could get all of your Spud Boy accessories direct from the band. It's funny to go back. The This is from 1982. It's funny to go back and look at some of the prices of merchandise. Let's see what a t-shirt went for. You could get the New Traditionalist t-shirt for $9. That wouldn't fly nowadays. You could get a kids t-shirt for $7. That's funny, though, looking at this now, the t-shirts are only available in small, medium, and large. I don't think that would fly nowadays, but you could get a pin, a poster, postcards. Wow, a set of 6 postcards for $2.50. I think this is one of the coolest things. This is kind of the thing, this is why I always tell people, this is why you still collect records. This is the stuff you can really sort of geek out. Now, I will put that back in the sleeve later, because it always fights me getting back in there. And I would prefer not to swear like a sailor. Anyway, let's get into the record just a little bit. Like I said, I really do like this record. If I had to make one sort of complaint about it, it is that it is a little bit monotone. Some of the songs run together. Now, this was definitely a big step away from the New Traditionalist, the record that came out before it. If I had to choose, man, it's a tough choice. I don't know. New Traditionalist has a lot of really good songs on it, as does this one. But I think I would take this one over New Traditionalist, but not by a lot. But I think I would take this one over New Traditionalist. Although, like I said, this record is a lot more monotone than any of the records the band had put out before it. Every other album in the band's catalog, the songs are so much more diverse. I would not really accuse this album of having a lot of diversity in the way it sounds, but I do like most of the songs on it. Of course, it starts out with the song Time Out for Fun. It has the intro, "Hello, this is Devo. We would like to say." I really like that song a lot. The next song is Peekaboo, one of the biggest hits off of this album. If you ever go see the band live, you'll definitely see the song Peekaboo live. I love this song. I love the video for this song. Of course, everybody who's seen the video has seen the maniacal clown, which as a little kid actually did quite scare me the first time I saw that video on MTV. Probably around the time that this record came out. I was not particularly a big fan of the clown fellas. The next song is one of my favorite songs on the entire album, which is Out of Sync. I absolutely love that song. It's one of the songs that sounds a little bit different to me. It has a little bit of a different kind of intro. The song Explosions is after that. That's another song I really like a lot off this album. Another one of one of my 2 or 3 favorite songs off this record. The next song is That's Good, another one of the video's singles off of this song, or off of this record, I should say. And as I mentioned, I thought that this album becomes a little bit monotone. If you listen to the whole thing start to finish, it's also sort of one of my very minor complaints about this record is the videos. All of the videos on this record look pretty much exactly the same. Like I said, I feel like you almost get the sense that the videos were like all filmed in one afternoon before the band went out on tour, which isn't a bad thing. I don't think they're bad videos, but they just weren't quite as interesting to me as, the videos that the band would make. Prior to this record, I feel like the band really put a lot of effort and energy into all of their music videos in the past, but on this record, it didn't seem as though they were quite as inspired when it came to the video presentation. But I do love the song That's Good. The next song is another one of my favorite songs off of this record, which is the song Patterns. I really love that song a lot. The next song after that is Big Mess. I would say there's 2 songs on this record that to me are kind of the weaker songs on this album. Big Mess is one of them. Not really my favorite song off the record. Not really my favorite song in the band's catalog. The next one is probably my least favorite song on the record, and I only say this sort of vocally and lyrically because I love the music on the song Speed Racer, but I really don't like the vocals. I don't like the lyrics. But if you were to put different lyrics and maybe sort of different vocals over the song Speed Racer, I think instrumentally it's one of my favorite songs on the record, but I don't like the lyrics. I don't like the vocals. It's unfortunate because I think musically it's one of the coolest songs on the album. The next song is What I Must Do. I love that song. Also, back on track after a couple of weaker ones. The next song after that is I Desire. One of the more controversial songs on the record because a lot of the lyrics from this song were taken directly from a poem that was written by John Hinckley Jr., trying to get the attention of actress Jodie Foster. John Hinckley Jr., of course, became famous for shooting then President Ronald Reagan in March of 1981. And this poem was written to woo actress Jodie Foster. A lot of the lyrics were from a poem. And whenever I think of that, I just think, really? Jodie Foster, huh? And then you go through and you read some of the lyrics. It says, I pledge allegiance to the thought that your love is all that matters, and the gestures have the power to bring the whole world to its knees. Really? Jodie Foster, huh? All right, friend. I mean, no judgment. After that, the album ends with my favorite song on the record. Arguably easily one of my top 5 Devo songs of all time. Maybe higher than that. The song Deep Sleep. I love that song. I think that is a perfectly written, cool, dark song. I love the music. I love the instrumentation on it. I think that is, like I said, probably one of my top 5 favorite records in the entire Devo catalog. Anyway, that's a little summation of my opinion of the 1982 Devo album. Oh No, It's Devo. If you haven't gone back and listened to it in a while, I definitely would. Like I said, it's not the greatest album in the history of the band's catalog, but for me it is a sentimental favorite because it is the first one I ever owned. It is one I go back to and listen to a lot. Like I said, I think I would take it over new traditionalists. For me, the first 5 Devo albums to me are all pretty classic. After this record, starting in 1984 with the record Shout, and then heading into Total Devo, Smooth Noodle Maps, and Something for Everybody. Some of that stuff is pretty good. Some of that stuff gets pretty inconsistent, in my opinion. But I love the first 5 albums. Really, most of the way through all of them. Anyway, man, thank you so much for checking out this video. This is Archaic Records. My name is Jamie, coming at you from Nashville, Tennessee. Be sure to go out and support your local record store. Go out and listen to Devo, any of the first 5 albums. You can't go wrong with any of them. Be sure to check back every week for Morrissey Monday, my weekly celebration of all things Morrissey and the Smiths, as well as other record content throughout the week. And until next time, my friends, I'll talk to you then.